particular, this $220 million boondoggle, this PR campaign largely featuring Kristi Noem on horseback and Kristi Noem in a helicopter and Kristi Noem here or Kristi Noem there, basically $220 million PR campaign at taxpayer expense.
Senator Schiff.
Senator Blumenthal, thank you for bringing us together today, and I want to join in thanking Leo and Javier and Marimar for the courage that you've demonstrated in coming forward, your willingness to speak out. I think we are all deeply disturbed by how you have been treated by the U.S. government. It is just appalling to me that we would treat human beings this way and that you had to endure what you have. We saw today in the hearing that the Secretary of Homeland Security takes no responsibility for the treatment of U.S. citizens or immigrants. She used every opportunity to deflect responsibility. She could not acknowledge the mistakes of her agency. All the people that have been victimized in our cities by these mass sweeps, the indiscriminate arrests of citizens and non-citizens alike. As Javier will describe, he was arrested at his workplace. He offered to show identification. He's a U.S. citizen, but was jailed for days. We see this routinely. People picked up just on the basis of how they look or how well they speak the language or what their job is as a part of this indiscriminate immigration policy by the Secretary. When excessive force is used, there is no repercussion. There is no independent investigation, and independent state and local investigators are pushed from the scene, or you have cases where evidence is driven 1,000 miles away rather than preserved at the scene or elsewhere to maintain the chain of custody. I served as an assistant U.S. attorney for years. This is not how you conduct an investigation. To have a secretary who, in the immediate aftermath of a tragic shooting of a U.S. citizen and repeatedly, without any basis, makes the false, sensational claim that these are domestic terrorists, and then doesn't have the character to admit her mistake is just reprehensible. And none of this instills any confidence in the country that this agency is being run appropriately, or where there's an excessive use of force against citizens or non-citizens, that those cases are being properly investigated. So we have an agency run amok. It is bad enough what they're doing to U.S. citizens and immigrants, but they are also wasting vast amounts of taxpayer resources on sweetheart contracts for friends of friends or family of friends. We discussed at length, in particular, this $220 million boondoggle, this PR campaign largely featuring Kristi Noem on horseback and Kristi Noem in a helicopter and Kristi Noem here or Kristi Noem there, basically $220 million PR campaign at taxpayer expense, which she acknowledged was approved by the president, although was very reluctant to do so. That contract went to a company that didn't exist 11 days before it got the contract. The bulk of that funding, $143 million, went to a subcontractor that just happens to be run by the husband of her press person at the time, someone also who ran her campaign as the governor of South Dakota. And she has the audacity to suggest that this was all a mere coincidence, just, I guess, a happy coincidence that friends and family of friends ended up with such a massively lucrative, apparently no-bid contract. We released a report just a few days ago from my office that outlines $144 million of expenditures by ICE on weapons and non-lethal supplies. Just in the last year, that's a 360% increase in expenditures on weapons by ICE and a doubling of expenditures on weapons and other related equipment by Customs and Border Protection. This is an agency awash in resources and run amok that is desperately in need of oversight and reining in. And Senator Blumenthal, I thank you for all you're doing. In particular, I want to thank you for the efforts you're doing to fight these illegal ICE raids inside people's homes. Administrative warrant is not a warrant to invade someone's home. It does not survive challenge under the Fourth Amendment, and for the Secretary today to say that it does and that the case law supports it is simply false. In the case she's citing, the court never even reached that issue. A judicial warrant is necessary under the Fourth Amendment, and ICE agents are operating without judicial warrants to invade people's homes, and we have to put a stop to that. And I thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for your efforts on that as well.
In the closing moments of the hearing, Senator Adam Schiff delivered words that cut through the chamber with unmistakable clarity. After hours of testimony and questioning, after witnesses shared their experiences and lawmakers pressed for answers, Schiff looked directly at the conduct being discussed and offered a blunt judgment: the refusal to acknowledge mistakes, the pattern of deflection, the claims made without evidence. To him, the situation amounted to something deeply troubling, something he described plainly as reprehensible. It was a moment that captured the tension of the entire hearing. Throughout the proceedings, witnesses had spoken about encounters that left them shaken and confused. Citizens detained despite offering identification. Individuals taken from workplaces or neighborhoods without clear explanation. Families left searching for answers while government officials struggled to explain what had happened. These were not abstract policy debates or theoretical legal arguments. These were real stories from people who stepped forward, willing to speak publicly about their experiences. Schiff began by acknowledging their courage. He thanked them, Leo, Javier, Marimar, for coming forward, for telling their stories despite the fear and uncertainty that often accompanies speaking against powerful institutions. Their presence in that room reminded everyone watching that the consequences of government policy are not measured only in statistics or headlines. They are measured in human lives. And yet, according to Schiff, what troubled him most was not just what had happened in those encounters, but the response that followed. He described a hearing where the head of a powerful federal agency repeatedly declined to accept responsibility, where questions about mistakes were met with deflection, where the possibility of wrongdoing seemed impossible to acknowledge. In Schiff's view, leadership carries a basic obligation. When something goes wrong, the public deserves honesty. They deserve accountability. They deserve leaders willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Instead, the senator argued what the country witnessed was something different. He pointed to what he called indiscriminate enforcement actions, sweeps in cities where individuals were detained based not on confirmed violations, but on assumptions. People stopped because of how they looked, because of how they spoke, because of the jobs they held. Among them, citizens who had every legal right to be where they were. One story stood out in particular. A man arrested at his workplace, a citizen who offered identification to show exactly who he was. Yet he was still detained and held for days. According to Schiff, this was not an isolated case. It was part of a pattern emerging across multiple communities. In a nation built on constitutional protections, that raises serious questions. The Fourth Amendment is not an obscure technical rule buried in legal textbooks. It is a foundational safeguard of American liberty. It protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures. It requires judicial oversight before authorities enter a private home. It reflects a principle deeply embedded in the country's history. That government power must be limited by law. But Schiff argued that those boundaries were being blurred. During the hearing, he challenged the claim that administrative warrants could justify entering private homes. He stated plainly that such warrants are not the same as judicial warrants approved by a court. Without that judicial approval, he said, entering someone's home violates constitutional protections. Yet, according to his account, enforcement actions were continuing without that safeguard. If true, the implications extend far beyond a single agency or a single policy debate. Because at its core, the American system depends on something fragile but essential: trust. Trust that the law will be applied fairly. Trust that power will be exercised responsibly. Trust that when government agencies make mistakes, they will acknowledge them and correct them. When that trust erodes, confidence in institutions erodes with it. Schiff also raised concerns about how resources were being used. He pointed to a controversial contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a public relations campaign that prominently featured the leadership of the agency itself. According to the senator, the contract had been awarded under circumstances that raised serious questions. A company that had barely existed before receiving the contract, subcontractors tied to political allies, vast sums of taxpayer money flowing through a system that appeared to lack transparency. To Schiff, these issues were not separate from the broader concerns raised during the hearing. They were part of the same story. A story about oversight, responsibility, and the dangers of unchecked authority. Because when an agency grows powerful, well-funded, and shielded from scrutiny, problems rarely remain hidden for long. Government power is necessary. It protects borders, it enforces laws, it ensures that the country functions, but the American system was never designed to operate on power alone. It was designed around accountability, the idea that every branch of government must answer to the others, and ultimately to the public. That is why hearings like this matter. They are messy, they are confrontational, they are often uncomfortable. But they are also one of the few places where officials must face direct questions about their actions, where testimony is recorded for the public record, where lawmakers attempt, however imperfectly, to shine light into the machinery of government. And sometimes, in moments like the one we witnessed today, that scrutiny produces a stark realization. Democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires vigilance, it requires oversight. It requires citizens who are willing to ask difficult questions about the people entrusted with authority. Because when power operates without accountability, the consequences do not stay confined to hearing rooms or committee chambers. They ripple outward, into communities, into families, into the everyday lives of the people government is meant to serve. Senator Schiff's closing remarks were not simply a criticism of one official or one agency. They were a warning about what happens when responsibility is avoided and oversight is ignored. In the end, the strength of a democracy is not measured by how much power its institutions possess. It is measured by how willing those institutions are to answer for how that power is used. And that responsibility belongs not only to elected officials, but to every citizen who demands transparency, fairness, and respect for the law. If you believe in accountability, if you believe that the truth behind moments like this deserves to be seen and understood, then stay informed, stay engaged, and subscribe to Liberty Report USA.